since the last week, there have been more and more revelations about your colleague and
Who's that?
George Santos.
What's the revelations you found out?
About his mother, he's saying his mother was in the World Trade Center when she was in.
I don't think that's new in the last week.
What's that?
I don't think that's new in the last week.
Okay, well, he's lied about his past. He's admitted to lying about his past. You stood by him. Are you standing by him simply because if he resigned, that could cost you a seat?
No. You know why I'm standing by him? Because his constituents voted for him. I do not have the power simply because if I disagree with somebody or what they have said, that I remove them from elected office. Now, I will hold him to the same standard I hold anyone else elected to Congress. If for some way when we go through ethics that he has broken the law, or then we will remove him. But it's not my role. I believe in the rule of law. A person's innocent till proven guilty. And if I was to hold the standard that if somebody lied, Joe Biden couldn't be president right now. He told us he had 3 degrees. He graduated first in his class, the numerous times before. So let's not be sensational. The American public in his district voted for him. He has a responsibility to uphold what they voted for, to work and have their voice here. But at any time, if it rises to a legal level, we will deal with it then.
What you guys have up on the floor this week is about extending the statute of limitations on pandemic unemployment benefit fraud. George Santos has been indicted. One of his indictments is for unemployment benefit fraud. Does that undermine the message you're trying to send with that bill? And then also, given all those indictments of Mr. Santos, a question for you and Chairwoman Stefanik is, should he resign?
So first of all, in regard to George Santos, he was already removed from all of his committees. There is a legal process. The charges just came out. We just saw some of them this morning. And so in America, there's a presumption of innocence, but they're serious charges. He's going to have to go through the legal process. But we're going to continue to work to root out fraud. And there's lots of it. And we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud in many federal programs. We've pointed this out. I mean, they're not even checking Social Security numbers. So you've got reports of people even in foreign countries getting taxpayer money for things that should be only available to Americans who are coming on hard times. Not to go to drug cartels or to people that just want to bilk the system. And so I hope Democrats will support us in rooting out fraud. They haven't shown an interest in it so far, but we're going to bring legislation to continue.
Does it undermine the message that you're trying to send with this bill, though, with this indictment of one of your...
Obviously, he's going to have to face the charges that he has. Again, he's got a presumption of innocence, but that court process is going to play itself out. But he's already been removed from all of his committees. And I don't know if anybody else has...
Sure, I just want to add to that. As I've said from the very beginning on questions on this subject, this legal process is going to play itself out. Unfortunately, this is not the first time a member of Congress from either party has been indicted. There are a set of rules, and as the majority leader stated, he voluntarily had stepped down from his committees. We are committed to making sure that we root out any fraud when it comes to unemployment pandemic assistance, and we're working to have support from our conference, and it's good policy, and we urge the Democrats to vote in support of it.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you so much. The NDAA markups were supposed to start this week. Republicans on the committee postponed them indefinitely. Is this related to the debt ceiling debate? And if not, do you know what's going on there, why the delay was enacted?
Yeah, right now as the debt ceiling negotiations are going on, if you even want to call them negotiations, again, we've passed a bill to address the debt ceiling. One of the things that we included was reestablishing what the amount of spending should be in Washington. We bring it back to what it was pre-pandemic. We, again, have laid out what that should be, but as we're in these final talks, I mean, there might only be 2 weeks left before we actually hit the date. So I'm hopeful that as the speaker meets with the president and the other congressional leaders on Friday, that they can get some real specifics that get us closer to an agreement. And so for now, we're going to wait and see how that process plays out before starting the NDAA. But we've already been doing work on what those policies would look like on a National Defense Authorization Act.
Can I say as a task member?
Oh wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just want to say, since I am on the House Armed Services Committee, we've been working diligently at the subcommittee level and full committee level, and just as the majority leader said, we will be prepared to pass a robust NDAA. So when you talk about indefinitely, the NDAA is the one bill that every single year we've been able to deliver and pass, certainly since I've been in Congress, but for decades.
Last question. Speaker McCarthy scheduled an event later today. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib was scheduled in the Congressional Visitor Center to hold an event on Nakba, which is the day that Palestinians remarked the founding of Israel as a catastrophe. McCarthy's event is blocking that. It's a bipartisan briefing on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Any comments on that move by Speaker McCarthy to occupy that space during that time? And then on the fact that Tlaib was holding that event in the first place.
Well, the party in the majority is able to hold hearings and meetings, and I applaud Speaker McCarthy for holding a briefing for members to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Israel. America was, I think, the very first country to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. We've been such tight allies throughout their existence, and we've seen attacks and growing anti-Semitism even here in Congress, and we've been very vocal speaking out against any anti-Semitism. But I think it's important that we continue to celebrate and share with all of our members why it's so important that we have this special bond with Israel. The Speaker just came back from actually addressing the Knesset a few days ago, which is very historic. I think Newt Gingrich was the last speaker to address the Knesset. He and Prime Minister Netanyahu both spoke, and we've had a very special relationship. It's been very strongly bipartisan. Obviously you've got some elements of the Democrat Party who have become vocal against Israel. But again, we're going to stand up against any kind of anti-Semitism or any kind of attacks against Israel, and I applaud the Speaker for having a briefing that all members are able to come to. Thank you all. See you on the floor.
Yes, sir.
Just to get back to Schiff and Santos, an unindicted congressman with one facing 13 indictments?
Well, there's been a number of members in the past who've been indicted, especially on the Democrat side, and I never saw somebody raised to remove them from the House. And really, if you are now raising the question of this, because they were moving this even before the indictment, I think when the indictment has been put in place, I think the House should take actions right now. I think we should have ethics take the work to seriously look. These are serious accusations. But I also think everybody in America is able to have due process, just like Mr. Santos would be able to do with court. But I think from the House perspective is, should we wait till the court takes our action, or can the ethics look at this and look at it very seriously? And what I would encourage the Ethics Committee to do, look, I can't control ethics one way or another, but what I would encourage Ethics Committee to do is to do this quickly, to look at this. Don't play time out. There's enough facts. There's enough ability for people to come in and give your answers, and diligently together in a bipartisan manner look at it. I think for the long term of the House and the respect of the House, that is the way we should handle things, and especially going forward to anybody.
Ethics.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was one of the first members of this body to call on the subject of this resolution to resign, and I am personally in favor of this individual's expulsion from this House. Regrettably, however, I'm in the understanding that we currently do not have the 2/3 support from members of this House to expel that individual. I believe that this individual is a stain on this institution, a stain on the state of New York, a stain on Long Island, and a stain on the beloved Nassau County. With that said, we believe this resolution should be referred to the Committee on Ethics to ensure a thorough and expedient investigation into this matter. I firmly believe this is the quickest way ridding the House of Representatives of this scourge on government. I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. On the motion. The question is on the motion.
He said, do what you think is right and do what's right for your district.
What did he support? He say he did support it?
That he said, do what's right and do what's right for back home.
So what do you think the chances are of this getting 2/3 support?
I don't know. I mean, I think that people have seen over the last 10 months what a fraud he is. I mean, you read either indictment, there's a clear outline that lays out the fabrications, the lies, the manipulation of donors and others that he has committed over the last year or longer.
The Chair will not at this point determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. The determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows: House Resolution 773, providing for the expulsion of Representative George Santos from the House of Representatives. Whereas George Anthony DeVolder Santos, known as George Santos, was elected to represent New York's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives on November 8, 2022. Whereas after Election Day, it was revealed George Santos lied about a significant portion of his background, including his education and previous employment. Whereas George Santos has a long history of misrepresenting his and his family's connections to major events, including the Holocaust, September 11th terrorist attacks, and the Pulse nightclub shooting. Whereas on May 9th, 2023, George Santos was indicted on 13 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, stealing public funds, and lying on federal financial disclosure forms to the House of Representatives. Whereas a federal grand jury indicted an aide to George Santos's campaign on charges of wire fraud and identity theft for defrauding potential donors by impersonating Speaker Kevin McCarthy's former chief of staff. Whereas on October 5th, 2023, George Santos's former campaign treasurer pled guilty to falsifying campaign finance records, including lying about a $500,000 loan that George Santos claimed to have donated to the campaign himself. Whereas on October 10th, 2023, George Santos was federally charged with an additional 10 criminal counts. Whereas the additional charges were serious in nature, including conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States of America, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, access device fraud, false statements to the Federal Election Commission, and falsifying records to obstruct the commission. Whereas the indictment outlined a vast amount of evidence against Santos, including conversations he held with his former campaign treasurer outlining plans to commit the fraud he is charged with. Whereas these charges indicate that George Santos engaged in a serious financial fraud throughout his 2022 campaign for the House of Representatives. Whereas George Santos stole over $44,000 from donors by charging their credit cards without authorization. Whereas George Santos directly profited from his fraudulent actions, including transferring money to his own bank account to buy luxury items and pay off debt. Whereas George Santos engaged in election fraud throughout his 2022 campaign by deceiving voters regarding his biography, defrauding donors, and engaging in other illegal campaign behavior. And whereas as a result of these actions, George Santos is not fit to serve his constituents as a United States representative. Now there it be resolved that pursuant to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, of the Constitution of the United States of America, Representative George Santos be and hereby is expelled from the House of Representatives.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the Majority Leader or the Minority Leader as a question of the privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the Chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed.
Like many of my colleagues on this floor, we were elected with a commitment to work on both sides of the aisle to represent our constituents and the American people. Unfortunately, we learned very early into Mr. Santos's term that he was elected under false pretenses, which made it clear that he cannot represent the great constituents of Nassau County and across this country. Since he was elected in November of 2022, we have learned about countless lies, deceptions, and 23 charges against Mr. Santos. It is in the best interest of the constituents of New York 3 and all Americans that he is expelled from the House of Representatives. The lies, the deceptions about September 11th terrorist attacks, his education, his work history, his faith, the fact that he was Jewish, claiming that his grandparents escaped the horrors of the Holocaust. We also saw that he pled to a crime in Brazil. I was one of the first members of Congress to call for his resignation, doing so in January. In May, I motioned for an expulsion resolution to be referred to the Ethics Committee, asking for a thorough and expedient investigation and there were not yet 2/3 yes votes needed from this chamber for him to be expelled. Despite my desire to see Mr. Santos no longer serving in Congress, I believe that this would be the quickest way to rid him from the institution. And I thank that committee. They recently released a memo interviewing over 40 witnesses, reviewing over 170,000 pages of documents, doing their due diligence. Just weeks ago, Mr. Santos' former campaign treasurer pled guilty to falsifying campaign finance reports, including lying about a $500,000 loan that Mr. Santos claimed to have donated to the campaign himself. And days later, Mr. Santos was charged with an additional 10 criminal counts. These charges included conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States of America, aggravated identity theft, and the indictment outlined a vast amount of evidence against Mr. Santos. All you have to do is look at the lies and deceptions in the resolution and details of the indictments, multiple indictments, to see that Mr. Santos is a stain on this institution and not fit to serve his constituents in the House of Representatives. Over the last days, I've heard, Mr. Speaker, from many members saying that there is due process, that there is precedent. Well, I stand before you today, Mr. Speaker, in saying that if we're going to set a new precedent today, that we are against lying fraudsters coming to the House of Representatives, well, then I am all for that precedent. And I will add to that, Mr. Speaker, that many individuals have come to Washington, D.C. to rid us of the swamp. Well, today we have an opportunity to set new precedent and to remove someone from the House of Representatives that is not properly representing the people of New York's 3rd Congressional District. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will say, listening to the sanctimoniousness of my colleague from New York is quite priceless. Talking about politics, this is a gentleman who couldn't even condemn the New York City DSA in an op-ed, and in fact was more upset that I introduced a resolution condemning them than the actions of those individuals within the New York City DSA that supported the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. And that is precisely because of politics, because his district is one of the most progressive districts in America. He couldn't muster the courage to even condemn the New York City DSA. So save us your sanctimoniousness sitting over there with your smug look. Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to be in a situation where they are expelling a member of Congress. It is serious. And it comes with weight and gravity because that individual was elected by their constituents to serve and to represent their district. You don't expel a member for being a jerk. You don't expel a member for something they said. You expel a member for their conduct. The conduct of Mr. Santos has been embarrassing and unbecoming and unfit for public office. Lying about your background, lying about your life experiences, making up events that didn't occur in an effort to bamboozle voters into believing that you are the right person to represent them is wrong, fundamentally wrong. It's why all of us called for Mr. Santos to resign when this information came to light. The resolution that was brought about in May was referred to ethics for two reasons. Number one, there were not 2/3 of the vote to expel. And number two, you wanted to allow for a process to get more information that members could hang their hat on in a vote. That process is ongoing. We all would have liked to have seen it resolved more expeditiously than it has been. But given the voluminous amount of lies, it has taken time. What has changed since May is that you have a guilty plea by the treasurer who was involved in this scam, who has laid out precisely what happened. And you have a superseding indictment, 13 additional felony charges, outlining precisely what happened. And yes, Mr. Santos will get his day in court. But for the purposes of this body, we now have more than enough information from a court of law with the guilty plea of his treasurer to expel him from Congress. When you can sit with a straight face and say that you attended an institution like Baruch College or that you were a volleyball superstar and recite this on a nationally syndicated radio show, when you can make up the fact that your mother was in the Twin Towers on September 11th with not even an ounce of shame or remorse, you're unfit to serve. All of us, being from New York, remember that day precisely. I was in my 5th day of freshman year of high school. The number of my classmates whose parents were in the building, whose parents didn't come home, the number of first responders in each of our districts who still to today are dying from 9/11 related illnesses. This is not something you joke about, you lie about. It is unfit. So, we as members of this body, despite the political nonsense that just came out of my colleague's mouth from New York, we as members of this body have tried to allow for a process to take place, allow for a process in which the members of this body can be confident that Mr. Santos should be expelled from Congress. That process has been allowed to play out, both in the Ethics Committee and here today. And based on the conviction and guilty plea of his treasurer and the admission of the fraud that was perpetrated upon donors, upon the NRCC, upon former Speaker McCarthy's chief of staff, that is more than sufficient evidence and information to expel Mr. Santos from Congress. There is not enough time to go through the litany of lies that Mr. Santos has engaged in during his campaign and during his time in Congress, including just recently a claim that his 5-year-old niece was kidnapped by Chinese Communist Party spies. So all of us take seriously the oath that we took. All of us want to uphold the integrity of this institution. We are willing to take on a member of our party, not for political gain, not because we think this is fun, but because it's right. And I would ask my colleague from New York Name me one time you ever stood up to your party. You couldn't even muster the courage to denounce the New York City DSA. So we will do what's right. We have brought this resolution forward, and I encourage all of my colleagues to vote in favor of Mr. Santos' expulsion.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded.
Are you going to offer a resolution to expel George Santos?
Yeah, that's the plan. We're going to, we plan on filing the resolution this afternoon. It's been co-sponsored by all the New York freshmen. We just feel that enough's enough. Obviously, a couple months back, the suggestion was made because there wasn't a two-thirds vote in order to remove him from the House of Representatives to send it to ethics. I know that ethics has been a little busy, but you know, it's time that we see some results. And after the latest indictment, I think it's clear that he's not fit to serve in the House of Representatives. He's a stain on the institution, and that's why the New York freshmen have come together. He's also a stain on our state.
Have you gotten any commitments from either Jordan or Scalise to put this on the floor?
None whatsoever. We're acting alone right now. We think it's the right thing to do for our constituents, for Long Island, and for New York State. It's time that we move on from George Santos.
What do you make of that, though, that leadership is not calling on him to resign?
I think the election of Speaker is defined by a few other things. This is a big priority to us, and we'll see how the folks running for Speaker react to what we just did.
How's the vote on the motion to table the rule going in there?
You could ask that question to somebody else. Let's talk about George Santos.
With George Santos, do you expect to call something to expel him from the conference, or are you just looking to get...
Oh, no, this is a resolution to remove him from the House of Representatives.
He has no business being in the halls of the House of Representatives. He's an immoral person. He's an untrustworthy person. He's scammed hundreds of thousands of voters, hundreds of donors. He's stolen millions of dollars. This is the most provable case of election fraud that we have before us. He is a fraudster. He defrauded Long Island voters. He should be out of Congress right away.
Yesterday, Mr. Jordan said that he would not call on him to resign. Mr. Jordan yesterday said that he would not call on him to resign. He says it's up to him, it's up to his district. Does that disappoint you that that's the position of the potential Speaker of the House here?
We need two-thirds of the House to vote in favor of his expulsion. He has one vote. We'll see how everybody else feels.
Again, we haven't had any conversations with anyone else with the exception of the New York freshmen.
You can issue this as a privilege resolution?
I don't think we're there yet. I think that we're going to have an overwhelming majority and perhaps two-thirds of the House to quite quickly support this. It may not require privilege.
If he runs for re-election, what does that do for people like you?
He's not running for re-election, and the Nassau County Republican Committee will make sure he's not on the ballot in November.
What about removing him from conference before the vote for Speaker?
Right now, we're focused on removing him from Congress.
But do you think he should have a vote for Speaker? Because currently he does.
We don't think he should have a vote in Congress, so we probably shouldn't have one in Congress.
The sooner he's gone, the better. If what happens first, Congress or conference, may be an issue we discuss.
So when there is a new Speaker of the House, is your plan to go directly to leadership and call for them to back this? I mean, you're sitting here saying that he's not the best representation of the Republican Party. We haven't heard that from Republican leadership right now.
I predict this resolution is going to catch fire. Many people feel how we do, and what my colleague Mr. D'Esposito said, he is a stain on this institution. Many people feel how we do, and we're eager to see everybody respond.
Are you making it a requirement for a vote for a new Speaker?
No, and like I said, I don't think that needs to be forced. I think this is going to be organic, and a lot of folks I feel from both sides of the aisle will support the removal of George Santos from these halls.
He denied all these charges. He says that none of these are true. He says he's going to fight it in court. Does he not deserve his day in court?
He does not. I think there are two separate requirements, two separate standards. What he is known to be guilty of, with beyond any doubt, not just a reasonable doubt, is that he lied about his entire background. That, to me, and how he defrauded voters, Long Island voters, should disqualify him from holding this office.
Do you regret not voting to expel him when it was offered earlier this year?
I think there's some amount of process that folks who are accused of these things should be afforded. However, that amount of process is now behind us. It's time to move on from George Santos.
To Mr. Lillota's point, the vote last time was whipped, and there was not going to be two-thirds of a House vote, and that's why this is not an up and down vote. This is a two-thirds vote, and that's why we chose to move it to ethics.
Why do you think it's going to catch fire so quickly when it hasn't so far?
Did you see the additional dozen indictments yesterday?
Do you think that's a breaking point when the previous indictment wasn't?
His treasurer confessed to participating in a fraud with Mr. Santos. That is a new criteria upon which I think my colleagues can rely and get them to the point that they can support this resolution.
We got to get back in.
Thanks, guys.
Have you guys decided who you're going to vote for yet for Speaker? Have you?
I haven't said so. Not George Santos, though?
To the President's task, because I think it will behoove and help all the American people.
Will there be an expulsion vote on George Santos this week?
It remains to be seen. I've spoken to Congressman Santos at some length over the holiday and talked to him about his options, but we'll have to see. It's not yet determined, but we'll be talking about that when we get back tomorrow. Maybe one more?
Sir, let me go right here. Some issues with Social Security considering overpayments, same issues hitting the VA, veterans being told they have to pay back tens of thousands of dollars. You know, would you support bringing a bill to the floor that could address some of these issues, find relief for some of these people who face these problems with federal agencies?
Yeah, it's a terrible problem that some of these folks are facing, and these are people, our veterans, our seniors that we've got to take care of. And so there's a lot of thoughtful discussion and debate happening in Congress right now on what role Congress may play in trying to resolve some of that. But some of those decisions will be made in the coming weeks, but it's a top priority for us. Listen, we want to thank y'all again for being here. I want to thank all the board members, everybody who works here on this extraordinary, exciting project. We're cheering you along in Florida, all across the country, because this is a bellwether for what happens for the rest of the nation, and it gives us hope. When a state is well led, and when you have great leaders like Congressman Vern Buchanan and others who are at the helm, you have a great delegation of Republican members of Congress from Florida, and they are leaders in every respect in the chamber. So thank you for sending them to us. We'll continue to do a good job for you, and we want to say God bless and thanks for being here. Thank you.